Hey everybody, good morning. It is, a little after 10 a.m. Pacific on Friday. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy Friday. Yeah. Friday Fungasm. We do our best to be unboring. That's the whole thing. Thanks everybody for your support with the book, Stop Boring Me, How to Create Kick-Ass Marketing Content, Products, and Ideas Through the Power of Improv. Thank you so much to everybody who's embraced the ideas, who's read it, who's given me feedback, who's given me some really interesting ideas for the next book. I'm just all so grateful. So thank you, everybody. I want to talk today about narrative structure, though, because I know we're all up to here with the election, but there's some important lessons that I want to kind of bring back to the table. So we're going to do that. So rather than sort of our normal Ask Kathy Anything, and of course you can ask me when I'm done here talking if you want to, I'd be honored. But I really want to talk about something super, super important. Now I read David Meerman Scott wrote a post on the best marketer won, and it resonated with me. It's not about whether you agree with the political ideas per se, and whether I'm not judging you for who you voted for. That's not the issue. It's about a lot of factors, because we know that politicians are political brands. They are brands, just like businesses are brands. So what is an election? It is a referendum on political narratives. It's a battle and a contest of competing narratives. That's what it is. And, I wrote a chapter in my book, chapter 4 of Stop Boring Me, all about the human want and why it's so important. It's so important to creating great content and narratives that are unboring and narratives that stick. And I've written about this over the years, and I've been inspired by different sources. I've been inspired by the work that I do on a stage for 20 years in improv. I've been inspired by my background in marketing and branding. I've been inspired by Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all these ideas that have coalesced in my mind and in my experience, and the way that they sort of come together in sort of a tapestry. And I was at an event yesterday, and this speaks to the issue of how important narrative is. And it was a narrative association. It talked about narratives through this lens. There were a couple of researchers from Stanford, and they were presenting information that was global, but also domestic, some domestic parts, on the issue of class. And what they found was stunning, and I don't think surprising. It's a continuation of this 99% movement, and the fact that Americans are concerned about class. Here's where the narrative fits. Hey, Eric, when you have a large percent of the population that are concerned about their jobs and job security and working class, maybe people who do have college degrees, maybe people who don't, and you create a narrative that doesn't hit that need, there's a misalignment of narratives. And I think one of the big fundamental takeaways from this profoundly compelling data I saw in class yesterday was this. I think Hillary's campaign didn't speak to the issue of economic security the same way that Trump's campaign did. Now, we can argue about the accuracy and maybe the ethics and the construction of the narrative and how it was enunciated from the Trump campaign. We can argue about that, and I have some strong feelings about that. And some of it was fear-based, yes. But here's the fundamental message about narratives. Whether you're a business, whether you're a political brand, this applies across the board. Hey, hi, hockey storytelling, hello. This applies across the board. Doesn't matter if you're a politician, doesn't matter if you're a brand, doesn't matter if you're an individual. Narratives matter. And regardless of the ethics and accuracy of the narratives, Trump's campaign talked about economic security. That is an issue that people cared about. If you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I've written a lot about it, you know the pyramid of needs. What is that very first step in that pyramid? The very first step in the hierarchy of needs is security, physical security, economic security, our safety. And when people feel that is threatened, that very foundational security blanket is threatened, i.e. jobs, aspirational issues of self-actualization like community and belonging and social harmony and worrying about my neighbor becomes secondary. And that's a really important point. Hey, Renee, it's a really fundamental point. Hey, JS, And I can't emphasize this enough. The data was very clear yesterday from Stanford about the fact that we have a class issue, and the perception of class division in this country is staggering. And rightly or wrongly, and inaccurately and ethically dubious, Trump's campaign spoke to that issue of jobs in a way that was compelling. So when you're worried about your job, that becomes the primary narrative that gets you to act. It's the galvanizing force for you to take action, not the higher level self-actualization of community and belonging. And that's a really profound point. Rightly or wrongly, there's something primal about the perception of economic security. Does it mean that a lot of Trump supporters didn't care about those other issues? I don't believe that. Sure, some people just didn't care, but I think some people did. But when you're worried at the bottom of that hierarchy of needs and you're worried about that layer not being met, all these other layers of aspirational belonging become secondary. And that is the biggest point I can get across to you, is that if you don't understand, whether you're a political brand or an entrepreneur or a big business brand, if you don't understand the foundational need and worry and human want of your audience, you cannot align your narratives with their human needs. And it has always been that way. It's funny, I've written about this over the years many, many times. And yesterday, when I saw this data on class division, it was very clear to me we had a misalignment of narrative over here from a campaign and fundamental worry, concern with people who voted. And that misalignment caused, I think, this misalignment in what people's expectations of voting were. So you have to really understand, if your audience is worried about economic security, you've got to tell narratives that work for that. Not pander, not stoke fear, but narratives of hope. You have to speak to that. If that need is not being met, then all these other layers of community and belonging and all these other things become secondary, tertiary, all these different things. And that's the reality of it. I think Abraham Maslow had it right. He had it completely right. You can't have headspace to worry about these things. So in your business, whatever you do, and if you're in a position of creating narratives and reaching with people, I'm a big believer in hope, not fear. However, you've got to understand the baseline human need that your audience is operating at. Meet them where they're at. Don't judge them, meet them where they're at. If they're worried about their own jobs, you've got to tell that narrative in whatever you do. If they're worried about economic security, tell that narrative. If their economic security is pretty secure and they're worried further up that food chain in the hierarchy of needs, and they're worried about credibility and visibility and all these more self-actualized higher level functions, tell that story. The point of it is narratives galvanize people, and it's primal. We look out for our own self-interest. Doesn't mean we don't care about community. But when we feel threatened fundamentally, lizard brain kind of takes over. And we're not thinking necessarily in the most rational way because we're worried about our security. And whether or not you're in a business capacity or you're a voter, it's the same thing. There really is no difference. So the message to you, and I've written about this, like I say, a lot. And at this summit I was at yesterday, it hit me in the face. We just did not align, I think, the right narratives. I think Bernie somehow, if you voted for Bernie and you to win, you wanted Bernie to get the nomination and he didn't, and you didn't vote, well, that's a whole other issue. But what strikes me is that the Democratic brand, somehow didn't absorb that issue of the 99% and their concerns into the messaging and narratives that I think the Hillary Rodham campaign could have done and probably done a better job. And I think that's what was needed to get people, to galvanize people to come out and vote for her. So that to me is very powerful. And rightly or wrongly, this isn't about how you voted, but it's the power of narrative. And that to me is something that we all need to remember. So don't judge your audience for where they're at. Work with that. Don't exploit it. Don't pander to the fear. I think fear isn't the right answer, and I don't think it's the ethical way to message. However, if you understand that economic security is that primal need, and that's where people are at, you've got to offer hope. You've got to include them. You've got to tell messages about that. That's fundamental. And all these other things don't matter as much when people feel threatened at that most baseline of economic and physical security. And that's really, I think, a powerful, powerful human issue. Human needs don't change in business. We're still sometimes irrational animals. And we irrationally believe that we're rational, but we're not all the time. So you need to really understand and work with these dynamics. All right, questions. I'm happy to take questions. I just wanted to share that with you because it's interesting how we forget that sometimes. And I do think that, rightly or wrongly, when you get complicated in your messaging, you lose people. And I think Hillary is very intellectual. There's some wonderful things about their messaging. I think it may have alienated people who just were like, yes, but talk about jobs. Yes, but talk about jobs. Yes, but talk about jobs. And I think that's a big thing. Imran, you ask a great question here. Do you think that Donald Trump will be a good leader for the USA? I come from a politically mixed family. I am not in alignment with a lot of Donald Trump's views. I am not. However, one thing it is very clear is that he seemed to talk in emotional sound bites the way people were feeling. That's clear. That's really clear. And rightly or wrongly, he wasn't intellectual. He wasn't about big data. He was about blunt, direct, straight talk. And that spoke to middle America. And it is what it is. Do I think he'll make a good leader? I hope so. Because the foundation and well-being of my country depends on it, and the well-being of other countries. We're in it together. So I hope he is for the good of everybody. I have my concerns. Not going to lie to you. I have my concerns. I hope so. Because we rise or fall together. So I really hope so. That's kind of, good question. I can't say much more because I have my own personal feelings about it. But I'm really trying to offer this through the lens of a storyteller and as somebody who's a business storytelling strategist. And what I know foundationally in all the years I've spent telling stories on a business stage and on a comedy and improv stage, and what I know about human narratives. And that's, I think, the lesson here. Whether right or wrong or pain, and it is a little painful. I think that's just a powerfully important lesson for us all to remember. Great question, though. Anybody else have any questions? I'll happily take it, but I really wanted to talk about this. I think it's such an instructive and powerful lesson, and I wanted to make this the focus of our kind of Ask Kathy Anything today. So it's important to learn. It's important to learn from things and how we can do things better next time, and I think there's a lot of lessons that I think we can all learn from it. Businesses and political brands, we can all learn about how to strike that balance of human narrative. And I'm always going to double down on optimism and hope. And that's the right way to frame a narrative. Fear is too easy to go to. Hockey storytelling. I believe that the problem with both candidates is that they dedicated to attack each other instead of trying to engage rival audiences. I think that's very true. I think it's very true. I agree with you 100%, and it's clear that the American public, and a great big part of this country, felt disenfranchised. They felt like their voices and opinions weren't being represented. And they were really trying to solve problems. The American electorate wants to solve problems, and they're not interested in the attacks. They really aren't. And rightly or wrongly, clearly enough people felt that Hillary Clinton didn't talk to their economic security, and they only heard him talk about it. Now, do I think he can solve all those problems? I actually personally do not. So I can, again, debate the accuracy of the narrative, but he did talk about jobs because he fundamentally understood that people in their average day, working class families, it's security, it's economic security for them, and that's the dominant issue. They're not interested in people attacking each other. So your comment, I agree with you. I think keep it simple, stick to the issues, solve my problems. And I don't think, unfortunately, but either side did a great job of sticking to the issues. And that's the sad part. And the really sad fact, too, is that 47% of the eligible electorate did not vote. That's a very disturbing trend to me personally, because if that many people feel disenfranchised from the vote, I think something is off. Something is really broken in our system when 47% of the eligible electorate don't vote. That sways elections. That means they feel disenfranchised and disillusioned, and it's easy to demonize them and call them lazy and not care, and I don't know that to be true. That's another part of the narrative. Whatever narrative we believe, we act on. And if we dismiss that 47% and say they don't care, then we don't do anything to solve their issues. Jeff, you say, thank you, Hockey Storytelling. That's a great question, and I agree. Jeff Rock, once the narrative is embraced, the hold seems unbreakable. Yeah, it's hard. You know, the thing about narratives is narratives operate at an emotional level, not a big data level. And I think Hillary Clinton's campaign they were experts at big data. But big data is not a narrative. People want an emotional narrative. And unless you can pull the emotionality out of the big data, we can talk data all day long, but data doesn't move people to take action. Emotions do. Emotions pull people to galvanize people to, I'm not going to follow somebody into battle based on big data. But if you tell me that you care about my country and you're willing to lay down your life and you're willing to, make my country better because you invoke the founding fathers and what this country was founded on, I'm with you because you have me at that emotional core. I think once the narrative is embraced, the whole does seem unbreakable, Jeff, but I think you can break it. I think part of the narrative here, the other narrative that we're not talking about, is clearly 47% of the country felt that their views were not represented. And rightly or wrongly, I don't think it's an excuse not to vote, but some people, when Bernie did not get the party nomination, felt that the narrative about the 99%, again, the economic security, that got lost. It not only did it get absorbed in the Hillary Rodham campaign, but it got far down the agenda and far down the list. And Make America Great Again, whether you love it or you hate it, and there's a lot of baggage there, that's an emotional soundbite. People go, yeah. And Making America Great Again means putting people to work. And he spoke to the emotional truth that people are feeling. Facts are not about information. Facts are the emotional truth that your audience is feeling. I'm going to say that again. The only reality, the only facts that matter to your audience is how they feel. Because you can come at me with information all day long, but if I'm out of work and I'm a farmer in middle America in the Rust Belt, and you haven't figured out how to speak to my needs to put me back to work so I can put food on my table because my factory job is gone, I'm fearful. That's an emotional, primal thing. And all the big data about, that you throw at me in a very wonky policy way is going to misfire. It's not going to hit me where I need to hear it. And I think that's a really important point. Emotion, it's all emotional. And we need to be ethical about it in the way we frame emotions, because too easily I think narratives can be manipulated in business and in politics, both. But we do need to understand the emotional nuances of where the audience is at, because how we feel is the only truth that matters to your audience. So, great question. Thank you for bringing that up. So it is possible, and I think we're going to have to move forward, forget about politics for a second, we're going to have to deal with this issue of narratives, and what are the narratives the American people are telling about themselves, and how do we as a brand, both the Republican brand and the Democratic brand, how do we reach out to understand the narratives that Americans are telling themselves about their world and their fears, and try to make that better. So we very much need to get back to understanding narratives and emotions. And again, Abraham Maslow had it right. What's the hierarchy of needs? And if I can't meet my most fundamental needs, I can't worry about all these other things and being a good global citizen when I can't put food on the table because my factory job is gone and not coming back. Now, that's the emotional truth that I think is disconnected from, taking a high-level global policy approach when people are worried about what's happening at home. So alignment of narratives and anything across everything you do matters. And that's the message I really want to get back to. And it's in my book. Yes, it is, chapter 4, but this is such a palpable example. And as somebody who is a storytelling strategist who's been telling stories for 20 years, it just hit me in the face, the misalignment of narratives here. And that's the piece I just want to kind of latch onto here. Hockey storytelling, I believe that lamenting about Trump is not as necessary as analyzing which narratives. I agree. I think this is not about beating people up at this point. Clearly, we have 47% of people who felt disengaged, and we had enough percent of people who voted Trump that we have a narrative problem. So to me, it's not a question of beating people up. It's not a question of name calling. It's not a question of trashing or attacking. It's a question of who do we want to be? What's our identity as Americans? And it's changing. Our values are changing. We are not who we were 20, 30 years ago. So the thing that we have to understand and the thing that we have to do is, as we move forward, what are the narratives that dominate in America today? And how do we try to include as many people in this narrative? And there's a lot of narratives competing. How do we try to make people feel heard and create a narrative together that makes people feel included so that we can get to that higher level aspirational self-actualizing thing in the hierarchy of needs where we have community and everybody sees that they rise and fall together. And we need to have this discussion of narratives. It really is important. We really need to look at these narratives. It can't be an us and them anymore. So our fundamental narrative as we together has kind of crumbled. It's become an us and them, and we're split. And what the data from Stanford told me and just hit me in the face was that we are still a divided nation, not just along race. We are divided along class lines. And that perception, whether real or imagined, the perception is all the reality that matters. People feel a division along class. So the narrative they care about is what's in it for me and my economic mobility and security. That's the narrative we need. We need this to be about prosperity for all. And that's a narrative we're all going to have to kind of stare in the face and move forward if we're going to have social transformation. So whether, again, as I say, whether you're a political brand or you're a business brand, understand that most fundamental human need at its rawest form is really powerful. And when you get a chance to exploit or choose hope, double down on hope. I'm a big optimist, and I will always, because that's the ethical way. People have enough problems. What they want are solutions. So how can you understand where they're at and lift them up with a narrative that is hopeful? And that's really the key here. I think that's the big learning lesson. And it's clearly, we have a lot of work to do around narratives. So the issue isn't bashing each other. That's not going to help at this point. How do we move forward constructing a new reality and a new narrative where everybody feels they have a place? And that's very hard to do in a country where diversity is so extensive. A similar thing happened in Colombia with the peace plebiscite, so as the Brexit one. Yes, I think you're spot on. That's a really great point. I've talked to a lot of my friends in England, a lot of my friends in France, and I think the Brexit movement was about that. The Brexit movement was about, what about conditions here at home? We're worried about what's happening at home. Yes, I understand that we rise and fall together, but how can we create a narrative that makes me feel secure about where I'm at in my economic security too? And and we're seeing this wave of uncertainty as globalization keeps going on and on and on. It's not going to stop. So what's needed from our leaders, what's needed from business leaders, all the way down to our communities is, to me, we need narratives, and we need new narratives. And the stories we tell will either keep people away or mobilize people. And that's really the most powerful thing. But before we can do that, we have to understand, and this is painful in a post-mortem of political analysis, we have to understand the narratives that dominated people's lives, what they thought, how they felt, and how to speak to them in ways that matter and move them. People only are moved by narratives that speak to them. We're going to have to do that. We got a lot of work to do. So I think the work is for everybody. How can we use technology? How can we use business narratives? How can we use social narratives? How can we use political narratives to create more harmony and lift people up? That's really, and technology plays a role, but fundamentally this ain't about technology. This is not about big data. This is fundamentally about narratives. And it always comes back to the human condition, because technology changes, but human beings don't. And our fears and our aspirations don't, because we're fundamentally human. And that's really it. I guess that's why many years ago when I started my business, I called it Keeping It Human, because technologies come and go, but people are always human. And that's what we always have to remember. So thanks so much, everybody. That's all I got to say, but it's an important thing. I think it's an important message. So create the narratives you want in your world to lift people up. Lift people up and understand those narratives wherever people are at. Don't judge. Help understand it so you can speak to it. Don't pander, don't exploit, but understand so you can be in alignment with it. Understand where your audience is at. Hey, Ryan. I know, Ryan, you're joining me a little late. Ryan, you have the best. I have to give a shout out to my friend Ryan, because Ryan is a friend that I met at Second City, and Ryan is very funny, and he has one of the best. I'm going to give you a plug. Ryan has one of the best comedy voices, like voiceover. Like, he just makes me laugh, and he's very funny and very sweet. Hey, Ryan. There's your plug, my friend. I miss you. Jeff, thank you for joining. Thank you. Thank you for the questions, everybody. And we have a lot of work in healing to move forward, and we can do it. We're narrative animals. Human beings are narrative animals. So let's write some new narratives that include more people and help us come together. I think that's really the message. So, all right, everybody, happy Friday. Take care. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.